Ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to dive into the fascinating and often misunderstood world of avoidant attachment. You see, relationships are the essence of life. They shape our identity, define our purpose, and teach us our greatest lessons. But for those with an avoidant attachment style, relationships can feel like walking a tightrope where connection feels dangerous, yet isolation feels suffocating. Let's start by understanding this. Avoidants aren't cold or unfeeling, they are survivors. They've learned to equate vulnerability with danger. And so they build walls instead of bridges. They've perfected the art of self-reliance because at some point in their life, relying on others felt too risky. But here's the paradox: avoidants crave connection just like anyone else. Yes, even the most emotionally distant among us are wired to love and be loved. The human brain thrives on connection, on relationships that nurture and empower. The challenge is that avoidants often sabotage the very intimacy they long for. Now, let's talk about what happens when we throw no contact into the mix. On the surface, no contact might seem like the perfect strategy. It gives space, it halts conflict, and it protects boundaries. But for an avoidant, it can feel like a confirmation of their deepest fear that relationships aren't safe, that people will always leave, and that they are better off alone. What's worse? No contact reinforces their escape mechanism. Instead of confronting the fear of vulnerability, they retreat further into their shell, convincing themselves they don't need anyone. But let me tell you, this self-sufficiency without connection isn't strength, it's survival. And survival is not living. Avoidance may protect them temporarily, but it's a lonely path. Emotional growth, healing, and fulfillment demand something more, something we all fear at times: vulnerability. You might be thinking, well, how do we break this cycle? The answer lies in creating a space of safety. For avoidants to thrive, they need to feel that they won't be judged or abandoned when they open up. It's about patience, consistency, and trust, qualities that can slowly dismantle the walls they've built. But let's not forget the responsibility of the avoidant themselves. Healing begins when they stop seeing vulnerability as weakness and start seeing it as the ultimate act of courage. Vulnerability is the bridge that connects us to the people who matter most. So if you're avoidant or love someone who is, remember this: no contact may feel like the answer in the short term, but in the long run, it destroys what truly matters: connection. The challenge isn't to avoid discomfort, it's to lean into it, to face the fear of intimacy and discover the beauty that lies on the other side. Because at the end of the day, life is about connection. And the strongest people aren't the ones who avoid, they are the ones who dare to love, to trust, and to let others in. Thank you. Avoidant attachment is a fascinating and complex subject rooted in the way we learn to connect with others during our early years. At its core, it's a defense mechanism, a way individuals protect themselves from emotional pain. To understand why this attachment style develops and how it affects relationships, we must first delve into its origins and the behaviors it fosters. In childhood, attachment styles are shaped through the interactions we have with our caregivers. For someone with an avoidant attachment style, these early experiences likely involve inconsistent emotional responsiveness or even outright rejection. When a caregiver is emotionally unavailable or dismissive of a child's needs, the child learns to suppress their feelings. They internalize the idea that expressing vulnerability will not result in comfort or support. Over time, this self-protection becomes their default mode of operating in relationships. The hallmark of the avoidant attachment style is emotional self-sufficiency. Avoidants are often highly independent and value autonomy above all else. This isn't because they don't care about relationships, but because dependence feels unsafe to them. Deep down, they fear that relying on someone else will lead to disappointment or rejection. So they build walls to keep themselves safe, walls that often prevent genuine connection with others. This protective strategy manifests in behaviors that can appear aloof or distant. Avoidants may struggle to express their feelings, shy away from deep emotional conversations, or even push people away when relationships start to feel too close. But this isn't because they don't want intimacy. In fact, many avoidants deeply desire connection. It's just that their fear of vulnerability often outweighs their longing for closeness. The avoidant person's internal world is marked by a constant push and pull dynamic. On one hand, they want to be loved and accepted. On the other hand, they dread the potential pain that comes with opening up. This creates an emotional paradox. They crave intimacy but fear dependence. They want connection but resist the very things that foster it, like trust and vulnerability. To complicate matters, avoidants are often unaware of their own attachment patterns. They may believe they are simply independent or self-reliant, not recognizing that their avoidance stems from fear rather than preference. This lack of awareness makes it difficult for them to break free from the cycle of avoidance, especially if they don't see the negative impact it has on their relationships and overall emotional well-being. Despite their defensive behaviors, avoidants are not devoid of emotions. They experience love, pain, joy, and heartbreak just like anyone else. The difference is that they've learned to suppress these feelings to protect themselves from emotional overwhelm. This suppression can make them appear cold or indifferent, but it's really just a survival strategy. Underneath the surface, avoidants are often grappling with profound emotions they don't know how to process or express. What's important to understand is that avoidant attachment is not a fixed state. It's a learned behavior, and like any learned behavior, it can be unlearned. However, this requires awareness, effort, and a willingness to face the fears that drive their avoidance. It also requires a supportive environment where they feel safe to explore their emotions without judgment or rejection. The journey of healing for an avoidant begins with recognizing that their self-protective strategies, while effective in the past, are now limiting their ability to form meaningful connections. They must learn to reframe vulnerability not as a threat, but as an opportunity for growth and intimacy. This process can be challenging, but it's also incredibly rewarding. Ultimately, understanding avoidant attachment is about recognizing the humanity in their struggle. It's about seeing beyond the walls they've built and acknowledging the fears and wounds that shape those walls. When we approach avoidance with compassion and patience, we create the conditions for them to open up and experience the connection they truly desire. Human beings are not solitary creatures by nature. We are hardwired for connection. From the moment we are born, we begin to seek out others first, our caregivers, then later peers and romantic partners. This drive for connection is not just a desire, it's a biological imperative. Neuroscience has shown that relationships are integral to our emotional, psychological, and even physical well-being. It's through our bonds with others that we experience love, support, comfort, and a sense of belonging. This deep need for connection is especially crucial when it comes to emotional healing and personal growth. For individuals with an avoidant attachment style, the desire for connection is paradoxical. They crave intimacy just as much as anyone else, but their fear of vulnerability often keeps them from pursuing it. The disconnect arises because avoidants view emotional closeness with suspicion, seeing it as something potentially dangerous or destabilizing. To them, being emotionally open leaves them exposed to rejection or hurt. As a result, they may consciously or subconsciously push others away, even though they desire deep emotional bonds. The act of disconnecting, while seemingly protective, is often a barrier to the very thing they seek: genuine connection. In a world where emotional vulnerability can feel like a risk, avoidants have learned to protect themselves by withdrawing or keeping their emotions in check. Over time, this emotional armor becomes second nature. But here's the problem: while self-reliance can help avoidants cope in the short term, it doesn't lead to long-term healing or fulfillment. No one is truly meant to go through life alone. We are social creatures designed to seek out connection to survive and thrive. It's through relationships that we learn about ourselves, expand our understanding, and heal from past wounds. What many avoidants may not realize is that their self-imposed emotional distance is actually hindering their healing process. In avoiding vulnerability, they may be evading the very emotional growth they need. The healing, whether from past trauma, heartache, or fear, requires us to face our emotions, not hide from them. And while the instinct to retreat may feel safe in the moment, it is through engaging with others and allowing ourselves to be seen and supported that true emotional healing takes place. This is where the role of connection becomes vital. Avoidants may struggle to open up, but it's in their relationships that they find the opportunity to confront their fears and make lasting changes. The paradox is that by letting others in, they can break the cycle of emotional avoidance. Relationships, whether with friends, family, or a romantic partner, offer the space to work through the fears that keep them stuck. They provide a safe environment for expressing feelings and exploring emotional vulnerability. The key to healing for avoidance lies not in running away from connection, but in learning how to engage with it in a healthy and balanced way. It requires patience both with themselves and with others. Healing and growth don't happen overnight, and avoidants must give themselves permission to be imperfect, to stumble, and to make mistakes along the way. The process involves confronting deeply rooted fears, but it's also about learning to trust others, and perhaps most importantly, trust themselves. Avoidants also need to realize that connection does not mean dependence. True connection doesn't diminish independence, it strengthens it. Healthy relationships provide the emotional support needed to navigate life's challenges, but they also offer a foundation for personal growth. In fact, being able to lean on others and experience vulnerability strengthens an individual's sense of self and emotional resilience. It's not about giving up autonomy, it's about expanding one's capacity for intimacy without sacrificing independence. Ultimately, for avoidants, healing and growth come from realizing that emotional closeness is not the enemy. It's the very tool that helps them break free from the isolation that keeps them stuck. By embracing connection, even when it feels uncomfortable or risky, avoidants can begin to heal their wounds, rebuild trust, and create deeper, more fulfilling relationships. In doing so, they can move beyond their fear and experience the richness of human connection in its truest form. When we talk about no contact, especially in the context of relationships, it often seems like a solution to emotional turmoil. The idea behind no contact is simple cut-off communication with the other person to give space, to cool down, to create emotional distance. It's often used as a means of protecting oneself, especially when feelings of hurt, rejection, or confusion become overwhelming. For many, it offers a sense of control over the situation, a way to create boundaries that allow them to regain their footing. But for individuals with an avoidant attachment style, the consequences of no contact can be far more destructive than anticipated. At first glance, no contact may seem like the perfect strategy for avoidance. After all, they are emotionally self-reliant and tend to keep people at arm's length in the first place. By stepping away from the relationship, they are able to retreat into their comfort zone, avoiding the vulnerability and potential discomfort that often come with emotional intimacy. It appears to be a solution that allows them to maintain their sense of independence and self-protection. However, the problem is that this withdrawal doesn't address the root of the issue. It only exacerbates the avoidance fears and intensifies their emotional isolation. For avoidants, no contact can act as a powerful reinforcement of their deeply ingrained fear of rejection and abandonment. These individuals already struggle with trusting others, and the act of cutting off communication can feel like confirmation of their worst fears that people will always leave, that emotional closeness will lead to hurt, and that their needs will never be met. The longer the period of no contact, the stronger these beliefs become. What was initially a strategy for emotional protection becomes a reminder that they are better off alone, reinforcing the avoidant's tendency to shut down their emotions and disengage from meaningful connections altogether. This isolation, while it may bring short-term relief, ultimately becomes toxic. The paradox lies in the fact that avoidants, by distancing themselves from others, are only deepening their sense of loneliness. In attempting to avoid emotional pain, they end up creating more of it. This emotional withdrawal prevents them from processing their feelings, addressing the issues in the relationship, or learning how to manage their fears in healthier ways. Instead of healing, the void only grows, further disconnecting them from the people who could potentially help them grow. One of the greatest dangers of no contact is that it doesn't allow for emotional growth. When we avoid connection, we avoid confrontation both with others and with ourselves. Avoidants often need the support of others to face their fears, to confront the emotions they've been hiding from. By isolating themselves, they miss the opportunity to practice vulnerability, which is essential for emotional healing and growth. Healthy relationships require open communication, even in moments of discomfort. With no contact, avoidants miss the chance to rebuild trust, resolve misunderstandings, and ultimately create stronger, more fulfilling relationships. In addition to this, no contact can create a sense of unresolved tension. The avoidant may be left to ruminate on what went wrong in the relationship, only deepening their fears and anxieties. With no avenue for resolution or closure, the mind often spirals, playing out worst-case scenarios or fixating on perceived flaws in the relationship. Without the opportunity to discuss their feelings, avoidants may end up trapped in their own emotional turmoil, unable to move forward or make peace with the situation. It's also important to recognize that the fear of rejection and abandonment that avoidants experience is not just about others, it's also about themselves. Avoidants may feel that if they let their guard down, they will lose control of their emotions, and that is a terrifying thought. No contact can reinforce this belief, making them feel as though it is safer to keep their distance and avoid emotional involvement altogether. However, this avoidance of vulnerability also leads to emotional stagnation. The truth is, no one can grow emotionally without facing discomfort. Emotional growth requires us to engage with our fears, to experience discomfort, and to risk the potential of being hurt in order to heal. For avoidance, the solution lies not in avoiding connection, but in learning how to engage with it in a healthy and balanced way. True healing comes from learning how to navigate discomfort, to be vulnerable in a way that feels safe, and to trust that not all relationships will lead to hurt. No contact may offer temporary relief, but it prevents the deeper emotional work that is necessary for growth. By leaning into discomfort, engaging with others, and being open to the possibility of connection, avoidants can break free from the cycle of isolation and build the relationships that will help them heal. Emotional avoidance, a central feature of the avoidant attachment style, is a coping mechanism that people develop to shield themselves from the pain of emotional vulnerability. Avoidants tend to withdraw from deep feelings, often suppressing or ignoring emotions that they perceive as potentially overwhelming. While this strategy might seem effective in the short term, providing relief from emotional discomfort, it can ultimately undermine emotional growth and personal development. Avoidants may think that by avoiding their emotions they are protecting themselves from hurt, but what they are actually doing is preventing themselves from experiencing the emotional depth that is essential for healing and growth. This avoidance becomes a kind of emotional armor that protects the individual from the perceived dangers of intimacy and vulnerability. It feels safer not to confront difficult emotions, not to open up to others, and not to risk rejection. This behavior stems from the belief that emotions are too unpredictable, too messy, or too painful to deal with. So instead of engaging with feelings, avoidants create emotional distance, both from themselves and from others. This self-imposed distance can appear as emotional numbness, detachment, or even coldness to the outside world. They may dismiss the importance of emotional closeness and instead place a premium on logic, independence, or practicality. The idea is that by keeping emotions at bay, they can retain control over their lives and prevent emotional overwhelm. However, emotional avoidance is ultimately a form of emotional stagnation. While it may help avoidants avoid pain in the short term, it also blocks their ability to process and heal from past emotional wounds. Healing requires us to face our emotions head on, both the painful ones and the joyous ones. If we avoid our emotions, we avoid the opportunity to learn from them, to grow through them, and to integrate them into our understanding of ourselves and the world around us. Emotional avoidance, therefore, keeps individuals stuck in a state of unresolved emotions. Instead of releasing pain and moving forward, avoidants carry that pain with them, often without even realizing it. This emotional stagnation can manifest in various aspects of their lives, particularly in relationships. Avoidants may find themselves unable to connect on a deep level with others, not because they lack the desire for connection, but because they are afraid of what it might cost them emotionally. They may retreat into themselves when a relationship becomes too emotionally intense, or when they sense that someone is getting too close. This retreat can create a pattern of superficial interactions, leaving both the avoidant and the people around them feeling unfulfilled. The avoidance of emotional depth ultimately results in a sense of isolation, even when surrounded by others. Moreover, emotional avoidance can prevent avoidants from developing a healthy sense of self. Emotions play a critical role in helping us understand our desires, boundaries, and personal values. When we avoid our emotions, we miss the opportunity to align our actions with our true selves. Instead of making decisions based on what we feel is right, we rely on external sources, societal norms, logic, or the opinions of others to guide our choices. Over time, this disconnection from our emotions can lead to a sense of confusion or dissatisfaction with life, as we may feel that we are living according to someone else's script rather than our own. Emotional avoidance also prevents the growth of essential relational skills. Relationships are built on the foundation of emotional vulnerability and mutual trust. If avoidants are unwilling to open up emotionally, they can't develop the necessary tools for building intimacy or resolving conflicts. Without emotional engagement, relationships may remain shallow or unfulfilling, leaving the avoidant feeling disconnected, even in close partnerships. The inability to engage with emotions in relationships can also lead to misunderstandings, frustration, and feelings of abandonment, which only reinforce the avoidant's belief that emotional connection is unsafe or unattainable. True emotional growth requires breaking through the wall of avoidance and learning how to navigate discomfort in a healthy way. This doesn't mean disregarding emotional pain, but rather acknowledging it and allowing it to pass through rather than shutting it down. To grow emotionally, individuals must learn to embrace vulnerability and recognize that it's okay to experience discomfort, uncertainty, or fear. It's through engaging with our emotions, even when they feel overwhelming, that we find healing and strength. Only by allowing ourselves to fully experience and process emotions can we build resilience and learn the valuable lessons they bring. For avoidants, the journey of emotional growth is about reframing vulnerability not as a threat, but as an opportunity for connection and transformation. It's about trusting that emotions, when processed, can lead to greater understanding not only of oneself, but also of others. By facing emotional discomfort, avoidants can begin to break free from the cycle of emotional avoidance, cultivating deeper relationships, greater self-awareness, and a more fulfilling life. Breaking the cycle of avoidance is not an easy task. It requires a deep commitment to change, a willingness to confront deep-seated fears, and a proactive approach to emotional healing. For individuals with an avoidant attachment style, the challenge is twofold. Not only do they need to change their approach to relationships, but they also need to unlearn the protective mechanisms that they've relied on for years. These mechanisms, such as emotional withdrawal, detachment, and self-sufficiency, were once necessary for survival, but are now hindering their ability to create meaningful and fulfilling relationships. The first step in breaking the cycle is developing self-awareness. Many avoidants are not even fully conscious of the patterns they engage in. Their detachment and withdrawal can seem normal to them, simply a way of protecting their emotional well-being. But in reality, this emotional distance is preventing them from forming the kind of deep connections they desire. Self-awareness is the foundation of change because it allows avoidants to see the emotional walls they have built and recognize the impact those walls are having on their relationships and overall happiness. Once self-awareness is established, the next step is to examine the fears that drive the avoidance. For avoidants, the primary fear is often a fear of vulnerability. They worry that if they open up, they will be rejected, criticized, or hurt. These fears are rooted in past experiences, perhaps from childhood or past relationships where their emotional needs were not met, or where they felt rejected or abandoned. Understanding the origin of these fears is crucial for avoidants, because it helps them recognize that the present is not necessarily the same as the past. The fears they carry with them may no longer be relevant, but they continue to govern their behavior. By acknowledging these fears and challenging their validity, avoidants can begin to let go of the grip that these past wounds have on their present lives. At the heart of breaking the cycle of avoidance is learning to engage with emotions in a healthier way. Avoidants have been conditioned to suppress or dismiss their feelings, but emotional avoidance prevents growth and connection. To break the cycle, they must learn to lean into discomfort, not run from it. This means allowing themselves to feel the vulnerability that comes with emotional connection, even when it feels uncomfortable. It means acknowledging emotions, both the positive and the negative, and learning how to process them rather than shutting them down. Emotional engagement is the key to forming healthy, lasting relationships. It requires a shift in mindset from seeing emotions as threats to viewing them as opportunities for growth and deeper understanding. In addition to engaging with emotions, avoidants need to take proactive steps to rebuild trust in others. Trust is often a significant issue for avoidants because of their fear of being hurt. Rebuilding trust requires small, consistent actions that demonstrate reliability and emotional availability. It also involves setting boundaries and learning to communicate needs in healthy ways. For avoidants, this may involve learning to be more open and vulnerable with others, even when it feels risky. It requires a balance between being self-sufficient and being emotionally available, a balance that allows for healthy interdependence without losing one's sense of identity. One of the most important components of breaking the avoidance cycle is creating a safe space for vulnerability. For avoidants, this safe space can be found in relationships that are understanding, patient, and non-judgmental. They need people around them who can offer emotional support without overwhelming them. This environment encourages avoidants to open up and be more authentic, knowing that they will not be rejected or criticized for doing so. Creating a safe space also means learning to communicate openly, not just about feelings, but also about boundaries and needs. It's about being clear and honest with others while also being compassionate toward oneself. Finally, avoidants must be patient with themselves. Breaking the cycle of avoidance is not a quick fix. It is a gradual process that involves setbacks and challenges. It's important for avoidants to recognize that emotional growth is a journey, not a destination. They may not change overnight, but with consistent effort, they can make significant strides in healing old wounds and transforming their approach to relationships. This process requires self-compassion and a willingness to forgive oneself for past mistakes. Healing doesn't happen in a straight line. It's a process of taking one step forward, two steps back, and then moving forward again. In the end, breaking the cycle of avoidance is about creating a new narrative for oneself. It's about understanding that vulnerability is not weakness, but strength. It's about learning to trust again, to engage emotionally, and to build deeper, more fulfilling relationships. With time, effort, and the right support, avoidance can break free from the cycle of isolation and fear, embracing the power of connection and emotional intimacy. This is the path to true healing, growth, and a more enriched life. The idea of breaking free from the avoidance cycle involves far more than just changing behaviors or making temporary adjustments in relationships. It is a transformative process that requires a shift in mindset. This shift is rooted in a fundamental understanding that connection and vulnerability are not just desirable, but essential for emotional well-being and growth. Avoidants, often without realizing it, resist the essential human truth. They see vulnerability as something to be avoided, but in reality, it is through vulnerability that they can access the deeper layers of emotional connection and personal healing. To truly shift this mindset, avoidants must begin to reframe their beliefs about themselves and others. They often carry an underlying belief that their needs are a burden, that emotional dependence on others is a weakness, or that showing vulnerability will inevitably lead to rejection. These beliefs are the products of past experiences, especially early life events, where emotional needs may not have been met, or where closeness resulted in pain or abandonment. The challenge is not simply to acknowledge these beliefs, but to challenge them to question their accuracy and relevance in the present moment. Avoidants must start recognizing that vulnerability is not a flaw, but a strength. It is an avenue through which deep, authentic relationships are formed and where true emotional healing can take place. At the core of this transformation is the recognition that relationships are not a threat to their independence, but a vital part of their growth. Many avoidants fear that emotional closeness will lead to loss of autonomy or control. However, the truth is that true interdependence, where individuals maintain their sense of self while forming meaningful connections, leads to emotional empowerment. Being able to rely on others for support does not diminish one's independence. Rather, it strengthens the resilience and capacity for personal growth. Avoidants need to reframe their view of emotional reliance not as a weakness, but as a necessary component of the human experience. Connection allows them to learn, grow, and heal in ways that isolation cannot. This mindset shift also involves recognizing the value of discomfort. Avoidants often run from discomfort, especially emotional discomfort, because they perceive it as a threat. They are conditioned to believe that emotional vulnerability will overwhelm them or result in harm. However, discomfort is an inevitable part of emotional growth. To break free from the cycle of avoidance, they must learn to embrace discomfort rather than shy away from it. It's through facing emotional discomfort, whether it's fear of rejection, anxiety about intimacy, or uncertainty about being vulnerable, that avoidants learn to stretch beyond their emotional limitations and experience personal transformation. Instead of viewing discomfort as something to avoid, they must see it as an opportunity to grow, heal, and develop new emotional resilience. Another critical aspect of this mindset shift is understanding that emotional wounds from the past do not need to define one's future. Avoidants often carry the emotional scars of past relationships or early life experiences, and these scars may create an ongoing fear of being hurt again. However, these past wounds, while they may have shaped the avoidance behaviors, do not have to control their emotional responses in the present. The key is understanding that healing is possible, and that it's okay to let go of the stories and beliefs that are tied to past pain. The wounds may not disappear instantly, but through conscious effort, support, and time, avoidants can begin to reframe their relationship with the past and see themselves as capable of creating healthier, more fulfilling emotional experiences. The idea is to no longer live in the shadow of past hurts, but to embrace the possibility of building a new narrative, one that is rooted in hope, connection, and emotional growth. Furthermore, avoidants must also learn to give themselves permission to be imperfect. For many with an avoidant attachment style, there is an underlying belief that they must be in control of their emotions, actions, and relationships at all times. This belief often stems from early experiences where emotional vulnerability was not safe or was met with rejection. Over time, this leads to a hyper-focus on self-sufficiency and emotional control. However, healing involves learning to let go of the need for perfection. It requires self-compassion and acceptance of one's flaws, mistakes, and emotional missteps. Avoidants must understand that vulnerability and emotional openness do not equate to weakness. They are part of what makes us human. And it's through embracing imperfection that true emotional connection and growth are possible. As avoidants begin to make these shifts in their mindset, they can create the conditions for true emotional healing and healthy